it's Marie, and doing something a bit different today. This video is I guess, like a series check-in, um, because I realized that I don't really know what series I have in progress, where I'm up to with them, what series I'm not really keen on continuing, so I thought I would figure all that out and, bring you along. Um, but it felt like a lot to type out and have to read for people, so I decided to film it. This is basically going to be split into 4 sections. Series that I'm up to date with and will continue, series that I have in progress but they're finished, I just haven't caught up to where they are yet. Um, Series that I'm in progress with but uncertain about continuing, and finally, series that I'm DNFing. So, there's a lot to get through. I will say I've set some parameters for myself. So, first, I've decided not to count a series of companion novels where uh, each novel is not pushing forward a larger storyline or plot. If they can all just be read basically as standalone novels, then I'm not counting those. I'm also only looking at series that I've either been reading in the last couple of years or that are being actively published. So, for example, there are some series that I know of and I'm going to continue, but like the most recent book was published in like 2018 or something. Um, so I'm not putting those on the list. They're just sort of in the back of my mind, and when the new one comes out, I'll pick it up. Uh, so, like I said, there's a lot to get through. I'm going to try to be brief because God knows I don't have a lot of time at the moment. So, let's kick things off and start with books that or series, I suppose, that I'm up to date with and am currently planning to continue. Um, it might be that further down the line, further into the series, I'll decide that I'm not interested anymore and I'll drop the series. But as of today, right this moment, these are the series that I am up to date with the most recently published book and I am planning to continue reading. So, first up, the Nightshade Crown series by Hannah Witten. Book 1 is The Foxglove King, which came out in February. I read it about 2 months ago, and the next book is out next February. I really enjoyed this one. It's about a young woman who is secretly a necromancer. She's hiding this magic from everybody because it's illegal, unless you join a particular order of like necromancer monks, basically. And then she gets blackmailed into like spying on the crown prince, but it's not as straightforward as that. She also has like a necromancer monk bodyguard, um, and there might be like either a love triangle or like a polyamorous relationship developing. I'm hoping for the latter, but we'll wait to see. Next is the Shepherd King series by Rachel Gillig. First book was One Dark Window, which I also read only a couple of months ago. And the next book is out this October. I don't know if I'm going to pre-order it or like get right onto getting it when it comes out. I have a feeling I might wait until like post Christmas and see if it's discounted in a sale or something. But I believe this is only a duology, so once the second book comes out, then that'll be it, which is great. So it'll be nice to have that one finished with book 2. That one's a bit harder to describe. It's sort of about a woman named Elspeth who basically has this special magic which has been given to her by like a dark spirit called the Nightmare, which lives in her head. Um, and there's a dark forest and this like political plot. It's all very atmospheric, actually. I enjoyed the atmosphere of it. So hopefully the second book will be good. I have high hopes, but we'll see. Next is Silver Under Nightfall series by Rinch Pecco. I read the first book, which is Silver Under Nightfall, late last year, and it blew me away. I was surprised by how much I loved it. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. So this is about a vampire hunter named Remy who basically gets pulled into an investigation um, to uncover the source of a vampiric disease that is turning vampires into like basically demonic creatures that can't be killed. But also part of this investigation are two vampires, noble vampires, um, Lord Zidane Malik and Lady Xiaodan Song, I believe her name is. I've gone blank at the moment. But they have this interesting tension that ultimately develops into a romance between the three of them. But obviously they're vampires, he's a vampire hunter. There's this disease that they have to deal with, plus like the different political elements. I really enjoy this series. I'm very excited for book 2. It was supposed to come out this October, but it's been pushed back to next April, and it's very sad. But, you know, that's fine. I just want it to be good when it finally gets here. Then I have Fence by C.S. Pacat. This is a series of comics and graphic novels about basically a fencing team at a boys' boarding school. It follows, in particular, Nick, who is a scholarship student, and he is trying to improve his fencing and be the best, basically, for reasons. And also new to the school is a boy named Seiji, who is ranked number 2 in the world. And he also wants to be number 1. So they have some things going on. It's also a slow burn romance between the two of them. It's very cute. I adore this series. It's so fun and so funny and very queer if you're interested in that. Also by C.S. Pacat is Dark Rise. This is her young adult historical fantasy, basically about a boy named Will who gets drawn into a battle between dark forces and light forces. It's set in London, I believe, in and around London, in, I want to say the 1800s, but I can't fully remember. It's been a couple of years since I read it. But book 2, which is called Dark Air, is coming out in November, and I've already pre-ordered it, and I'm very excited. Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. If you haven't heard of Heartstopper at this point, you've probably been living under a rock. This is basically a graphic novel series about Nick and Charlie, who are 2 high school boys at a British boarding school, who meet in a homeroom and fall in love. Basically, it's very wholesome and very sweet, but it also deals a lot with issues of mental health and like homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, all that stuff. Volume 5 is coming out in November, I believe. That was supposed to be the last volume, but Oseman has recently announced that there's actually going to be a 6th volume as well, which I think is out next year, so that's very exciting. The Death's Embrace series by H.L. Moore. The first book is Heart of Dust, and this is an indie author. She self-publishes her works, and she's also Melbourne-based, I believe, which is great. So this is a fantasy series that I'm blanking on a lot of the details at the moment because I read it last year, but it's basically about I guess he's a miner, but he's also a rebel. He's leading this rebel group against the corrupt government. And he meets this, what would you call it, like an apothecary guy, but he's kind of mysterious and he's got a weird past as well. So yeah, it was actually very good. I enjoyed it. Book 2 is also already available. Book 3 is currently being written, so don't know when that's coming out, but hopefully soonish, maybe. I'm not sure. We'll see. But I'm very keen to read it when it does come. Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and illustrated by Fiona Staples. This is another graphic novel series. There's a lot of them now that I think about it. Basically, this is a science fiction story about Alana, who is from, I think, a moon or a planet. I think she's from a planet, and a guy named Marco, and he's from the moon that orbits this planet. And these two planets, these peoples, are in the middle of just this huge war, and it's been going on for years. But Alana and Marco meet in a prison camp. I think she's a guard and he's a prisoner, and they fall in love despite the fact that they're from these two warring cultures. And they have a baby and have to go on the run because this baby, Hazel, is basically a symbol of the potential peace that could exist between these two peoples. So volume 10 was released late last year. I read it a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, it's just a great story. It doesn't pull any punches. It gets very dark, it's very emotional, it gets very sad. Basically, don't trust anything. No one is safe. I'll say that. But it's great. I really respect authors who will, not be protective of their characters, because it's a hard thing to do, because readers get attached and they don't like it when their favourite characters are potentially in danger. But in this series, everyone's in danger all the time. And I really like that. So if you haven't checked out Saga, make sure you do. It's very adult though, so keep it away from young eyes. And finally, the last book in my up-to-date and will continue segment is Court of Thorns and Roses, aka ACOTAR, by Sarah J. Maas. This is, you've probably heard of it. It's the romance fantasy series about Fae. Although that sort of describes all of Sarah J. Maas's books now that I think about it. I have a weird relationship with Sarah J. Maas. I have a lot, like if I was her editor, there is so many things in her books that I would change. But I'm not. So, too bad. But this is it's just one of those I can turn off my brain series, and even though I can see all the flaws, it's entertaining enough that I can just set them aside and not worry about it. So there are 4 books currently, plus a novella, which I didn't like very much because it wasn't necessary and it was just a bit of a cash grab. But book 5, we don't have a release date for yet. So now let's move on to the series that are currently either complete or up to date, and I'm just not up to date with them. There are not as many of these. I'll start with the Big Bad Wolf series. The first book is A Wolf at the Door. It's by Charlie Adhara. I read The Wolf at the Door at the start of the year, maybe in February, and I bought it on a whim as an ebook, and actually was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. It's basically a werewolf detective series. And the first book was about a detective in a branch of the FBI which deals specifically with, I think specifically werewolf crime instead of paranormal crime, but werewolf crime in particular. And he gets pulled into an investigation in a small town where murders are happening, but he gets put on this investigation with a werewolf from, I think, some other kind of government agency, and they have to try and work together, but there's a lot of tension between these two groups, so there's a lot of tension between these two characters. It is LGBTQ plus friendly as well. I think both the main characters are gay, I want to say. I could be misremembering, but they're both men. So there's that if you're interested. Yeah, this series is currently complete. I believe there are 5 books, and yeah, I'm planning to read on. There's also the Atlas series by Olivia Blake. The first book is the Atlas 6. Book 2 is the Atlas Paradox. It was released late last year, and I was intending to read it at the start of this year. I never got around to it. It is on my list, However, book 3 has been announced for release next January. So what I think I'm going to do is, because Blake's books can be a bit complicated, um, I I remember Atlas 6 quite well, but I think I'm going to read Atlas Paradox later this year so that there's not as big a gap between book 2 and book 3. And hopefully I won't forget too many of the details. This is a dark academia series about a group of 6 young adults who get offered a place in the prestigious but secret Alexandria Institute, which is basically a secret, I think, magical school, or library or institution, something like that. And the catch is that there are 6 of them, but only 5 places. I've heard book 2 has some pacing issues, which is unfortunate, but hopefully the characters will remain interesting enough that I won't care so much, but we'll see. Then there is the Red Rising series, which I know has like more books coming out in it, but I believe they're split into 2 trilogies. I could be wrong. My understanding is that you can read the first 3 books, which was the original series, as a complete story, and then you can continue reading the following books after that as a separate thing that tie into the original series. Maybe I'm wrong about that, I don't know. Point is, there are, I believe, currently 4 books published. I've read book 1, Red Rising, which I actually really loved. I only read it maybe the year before last, and I did plan to read the second book. I actually own the second book, and I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet, which is annoying, but, you know, clearly I'm prioritizing other things. Yeah, I really love book 1. I think my issue with book 2 is that I've forgotten a lot of book 1, so I know I'm going to have to go back and reread it. And that can be, you know, quite a mental barrier for me. Red Rising series about Darrow, who is a red, basically. All of society is divided by colours. The reds are the lowest. They're like the miners. They do a lot of the hard labour. And the highest are the golds, who are political figures. And Darrow, after a personal tragedy, goes undercover as a gold to infiltrate their circle and, I guess, take them down from the inside. That's what I've gathered and what I remember. But I did really like Red Rising. It was very well paced. And the last series in this segment is the Great Cities series by N.K. Jemisin. Book 1 is The City We Became, and book 2 is, I believe, The World We Made, or The World We Make. I can't remember. I do have it. It's only a duology, so I should have finished it by now. But book 2 came out late last year, and I do want to read it. Problem is that, like with Red Rising, book 1, I've just forgotten a lot of the details, and Jemisin's books can be quite complicated, so I really have to go back and read book 1 before I can read book 2 in this instance. This is a story about great cities around the world, basically, in particular New York City. And these great cities have human avatars who act in the world and represent them. And in New York, we have, I believe, 6 avatars who are trying to defend the city and the world at large, I suppose, from the infiltration of the White, which is the villain from, I think, like another dimension or a parallel universe or something. I can't quite remember. But yeah, it was very good, very difficult to get through, hard to read, but well worth the effort. So now I'm moving on to series that I have in progress, but I'm uncertain about continuing. these are a bit more complicated. I just had a lot of complicated feelings about these things. So I'm going to start with the Scholomance series by Naomi Novik. There are 3 books in the series. They're all published. Book 1 is A Deadly Education, and this is a dark academia story about basically teenagers in a sentient school. They get plucked out of their lives and then dropped into this magical school. And basically they have to survive, and students die every year. They get eaten by demons and monsters, or like sucked into voids that the school opens up. I really enjoyed book 1. Book 2, I think, struggled to get going, and then book 3, I actually started reading, I want to say in January or February, but it was right as I was going into a reading slump, and I just put it down and never picked it up again. And I think part of my issue is that I have an idea of what I think should happen in this series, and I don't think that's what she's done. And like, that's fine, you know, it's her story, she can tell it however she wants, but I just think things have been set up that she's not going to follow through with in the way that I think would be most fitting. At this point, I can't say if or when I'll finish it. It might just get to the point where I decide I'm not interested anymore in the series and DNF the book and the series and donate all 3 of them at the end of the year. But we'll see. I might try and give book 3 another bit of a go and maybe try to get to page 100 and see how I feel, but it's touch and go at the moment. Godkiller by Hannah Kaner was released in January, I think. I read it at the start of the year. It's a new release. I believe it's even a debut. And it's a story about a god killer, basically, a woman whose name I can't remember at the moment. She kills gods because god worship is banned in this country that she lives in. The problem is that she meets a young noble girl who is bonded to a god, like an animal god. He often takes the form of a rabbit type creature, and they can't be separated because killing him will kill the girl, and obviously the god killer doesn't want to do that. So they're trying to dissolve the bond between them, but obviously things become more complicated. I actually enjoyed book 1. I don't know when book 2 is coming out, not that I've looked into it. There might be a release date somewhere, but I haven't seen it anywhere. I just, thinking about it now, I think I gave it 3 stars, maybe 4, I can't remember. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm invested enough to spend the time on following through with the series. Maybe I'll wait and see what the blurb looks like for book 2 when it's released, and maybe that will convince me, but right now I'm on the fence. Book of Night by Holly Black is it's sort of a hard one to describe. It's about a woman who, again, her name I can't remember. I've forgotten all the character names. But Charlie, her name's Charlie, and she is a reformed criminal, but she gets dragged back in because she's asked to steal a book from someone, a magical book. And there's all sorts of things working against her. Her boyfriend goes missing and things happen with him. I really loved Book of Night. I know a lot of people didn't. I don't fully understand why. I think I've seen speculation that people didn't like it because it was very different from Cruel Prince series, which Holly Black also wrote and is very popular online. But I really liked Book of Night. I don't want to give anything away. I'm not going to talk about spoilers, but it doesn't have a traditionally happy ending. um, it's not quite as clear cut as that, and I think that would bother a lot of people, even though it's signposted the whole way through the book. Um, I really liked that. As with Saga, I really respect when authors don't do the easy or expected thing. It would have been very easy for Black to give it a properly happily ever after sort of ending, and you know, the characters can just ride off into the sunset. But it's not like that. But I really liked that element of it. I thought when I read it that this was going to be a standalone novel, and maybe it was intended that way originally and then it got extended, but apparently this is the first book in a series. And this is what I'm on the fence about, because I really like how it operates as a standalone novel. I think there is definitely room to continue it. You could absolutely continue the story, and I assume at the end of the series give it the proper happily ending that you would expect. But I like that book one sort of stands alone and ends with a bit of a tragedy. Um, so yeah, I'm on the fence about this one because although I liked the story, I like how it is resolved and how it falls into its own little package. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll continue the series when book two comes out, but also maybe not. And either way, I think I would be happy with that. I think I would be worried that continuing the series would ruin the story that book one told. And finally, the last series in this segment is the Dark Gods series by Tara Sim. First book is City of Dusk, which I read last year. It's about it's a fantasy series about four families, and in particular four young adults in these families who are descended from four gods who basically made this city. And the gods have tensions with each other, so these families have tensions with each other, but they ultimately have to work together. I enjoyed City of Dusk. I think I gave it 3 stars, but I did read it about a year ago, maybe more, so I can't fully remember. And book 2 is The Midnight Kingdom, which is coming out next month or the month after. It's coming out soon. And I was originally very interested in reading on in the series because I did enjoy book 1, and I think it left off on a really interesting point. But I've since seen reviews for advanced copies that sort of make me question if I should spend the time on book 2. I think it has pacing issues, but also this is another one that I would have to reread book 1, I think, to remember what happened so that I could go on and read book 2. And I just don't know if I'm motivated enough to reread book 1 at this point. Let's move on to the final segment. These are the series that I'm DNFing. For various reasons. Some of them aren't that bad, but some of them are. Let's start with I don't know how to say this, the Tithanai Chronicles by Foz Meadows. Book 1 is A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, which I read in December and gave 3 stars. This is about a man named Vel who is gay in a country where basically if you're not a straight white man, you're nobody. So he basically lives in the real world. And through a series of events, he gets put into this political arranged marriage with a prince from a neighboring country. But in this neighboring country, everything's fine. It's like this utopia, like same-sex couples are like the same as opposite-sex couples, and women are in positions of power and they can be like in the military, and you know, race isn't an issue. It's like night and day. These countries directly border each other, but they couldn't be further from each other in terms of politics or culture. So he ends up in this marriage to this prince named Kai, and there's a lot of political machinations going on. There's a murder mystery that starts happening. I had issues with the book. I know it's a very popular one. I've seen a lot of people who are obsessed with this book, and I was not. I had issues. As I said, I wrote a review. In fact, I've written reviews for some of these books. I'll leave them all linked in the description if you would like to know more about my thoughts, which might clarify some things about how I'm feeling for you. Point is, I had issues, and I was originally intending to read book 2, which comes out in December, I believe, but I don't know, thinking about it now, I don't think I'm going to. In fact, I know I'm not going to, because I feel like some of my issues with book 1 might be rectified in book 2, or there might be some movement towards that in book 2, but I decided that I'm just not that interested. Next is the Between Earth and Sky series by Rebecca Roanhorse. Book 1 was Black Sun, which I read again at the end of last year and really loved. I gave it 4 stars. It's basically a fantasy world inspired by ancient Colombian civilizations, and it has 3 or 4 main characters in and around this city of Tova, where there's a big religious and cultural moment about to occur. But one of these characters is basically the coming of like the crow god. I did start listening to book 2 a couple of months ago, I want to say, and I was reluctant at first because I had heard from several sources that book 2, it just doesn't live up to book 1. It really has that middle book syndrome happening. It's doing a lot of setup and moving around of characters purely for the purposes of book 3, and that shouldn't be the case. You know, it should be able to sustain its own internal narrative even as it's pushing forward the overall narrative for the series. So I started book 2. I really tried. I was even listening to it on like 1.3 times speed, and it wasn't working for me. I decided to DNF book 2, and in doing so, I DNF'd the series. Next, I have The Chronicle of the Unhewn Throne by Brian Staveley. This starts with The Emperor's Blades. This is just a trilogy, I believe. And my brother loves this series, and he's been after me to read it for years, and last year I finally did. This is basically the story about 3 siblings whose father, the king, dies or is assassinated or something, and the heir to the throne is the youngest son, but he's like off in a remote monastery in the mountains, like undergoing some torturous training. I mean, genuinely torture. At one point he gets buried up to his nose in the ground and has to stay there for a week, and like once a day his mentor will come and give him like water. which I have problems with. I have problems with a lot of things about that storyline in particular. Book one was okay. Like I said, I had issues with it. It's reviewed below as well. My brother has told me that book two is better, and in fact, his favorite of the series. But I don't know. I just don't know that I care enough about the characters to spend the time reading more about them. And then we come to The First Law by Joe Abercrombie. Book one is The Blade itself, and this is a grimdark fantasy about a series of characters. I think there's 3 or 4 who get drawn together somehow. I can't really remember. I read it, in fact, I remember it was my first book of 2022. So I read it about a year and a half ago at this point. And I liked it. I did like it. I don't have any problems with the fact that it's grimdark. That doesn't bother me. It's not that I had an issue with. I know this is a very popular series. I know a lot of people who really love it. I thought the book one was fine. The characters were very interesting. There was one in particular that I liked more than the other two. They were definitely unlikable characters. Very morally grey, which I love, to be clear. I love a morally grey character. I like when characters don't do things that are necessarily good, or they decide to act selfishly. I just, it's hard to put my finger on why I'm not continuing this series. I think it's more that I read book one, I gave it 3 stars, I put it down, and in that time I've never thought about picking up book two, like ever. And in fact, most of the time I never even think about the fact that I read the first one. So that says to me that it's just like, it's not even on my radar, you know? So I'm just gonna officially DNF the series and continue not thinking about it. The Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. This is a young adult science fiction about a girl named Spencer who lives on this planet where they sort of, in orbit around this planet is this other species that attacks them every so often, like regularly. So Spencer wants to be a fighter pilot, basically, like her dad. But the problem is that her dad, he, during a flight, a mission, he turned against the other members in his team, and I think even killed some of them. And so Spencer is trying to, I guess, prove that she's not the coward that her father has been painted as. I really loved book one. Book one, fantastic. I gave it 5 stars. Book two, didn't love as much. I felt like it was covering a lot of the same ground that book one covered, just in a different context. Book three, I didn't like at all. I thought it was really badly paced. The characters that were introduced were just odd. It was really disappointing to see this series that had started so strong go downhill so swiftly. But it did. Book 4, which is the last book, is coming out in December, the end of this year sometime. It's called Defiant. I am not going to be reading it. Which brings me to The Expanse by James S.A. Corey. The first book is Leviathan Wakes. If The Expanse sounds familiar to you, it's also a TV show. It's been adapted. And I think the TV show is finished. Like, I think it's complete. I think the book series is also complete recently, but I could be wrong. I think it's quite a long series as well. I think there's like 9 books in it or something. I read book one last year, I want to say, maybe the year before. Um, and I really enjoyed it, actually. It's a science fiction series about a man who I think becomes the captain of a ship after things happen. I think his name is Jim Holden. It's been a long time since I read it. I can't fully remember. So it's about him and his crew, but it's also about a detective on another planet who's named Miller, and he's investigating the murder of a girl who is somehow tied up in what Holden's crew has got going on. So these two men ultimately meet and things go from there. Book one, ultimately, I really enjoyed. I think I gave it 4 stars, I want to say. But I got to the end of book one and I was satisfied. There is sort of a little strand that can pull you into the series, but for me, I was happy. Like with just book one, it felt like enough of a standalone that I was satisfied. However, I am interested in watching the TV series. I don't care if it's very different. I don't care if the book series is better. I don't care about any of those arguments that you could possibly give me. I just know that I read book one. I'm happy to leave book one as like a standalone situation. I'm not going to read the rest of the series, but I do want to watch the TV show. And now the last two. I've left the series that I hate the most to last. The first is the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. Book one is House of Earth and Blood. Book two is House of Sky and Breath. And book three is coming out in January, I think. I think it's something like House of Flame and Shadow, something like that. And I still get so angry when I think about it. I really loved book one. I gave book one 4 stars. I was surprised by how good it was because, as I said earlier, I have issues with Sarah J. Maas. I was eagerly anticipating House of Sky and Breath last year. It was one of my most anticipated books of the year. And then I hated it. I thought it was terrible. In fact, it's one of the worst books I've ever read. And yeah, that's that, really. There's no point reading on after that. And finally, the last book, the last series in this epic long series check-in is the Empire of the Vampire series by J. Kristoff. I hated this book as well. I think I gave it 2 stars. House of Sky and Breath got 1 star. I think Empire of the Vampire maybe got 2. Empire of the Damned is the second book in the series. It's coming out next year. It's already available for pre-order, because of course it is, because it's J. Kristoff. It's about a vampire hunter who's part of a religious order who hunts vampires. And there are different vampire houses who all have different abilities based on which house they're in. It's been a long time since I read it, so I can't fully remember the details. But I had issues with the way it was told in the back and forth style, because it opens with the vampire hunter, Gabriel. His name's Gabe. And he's been captured and he's telling his story to a vampire who's chronicling his story, but he flips between the story of his teenage years as a student and his adult life as a vampire hunter. And it didn't work for me for various reasons. Basically, this book is over the top from start to finish. And you know what? Maybe that works for some people, but to me, it's not a sign of quality writing. There's no restraint here, no subtlety whatsoever. And again, sometimes that works, but here I don't think it did. I just don't think that a lot of the elements were considered in how they work together instead of how they stand in isolation. And that brings us to the end of the list. Are you as exhausted as I am? I tried to be brief, but I don't think I was towards the end. I think this was a useful exercise for me. I want to make this a yearly check-in, so around the same time next year, I'll look back at the series that I had in progress this year, see which ones I've progressed with, how far I've gotten. If I haven't progressed at all, maybe consider whether I want to DNF those series, and just use this as a way to keep a record of what I'm reading in terms of series and try and figure out what I want to prioritize from what I'm reading. Obviously, I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction, and it's not often that you find a standalone fantasy or science fiction, so most of them are series. So I want to try and keep track of what I'm starting and what I'm finishing and make sure that I'm actually finishing what I start, or deciding actively not to continue it if that's the case as well. So with all that being said, let me know if any of these series are ones that you have on the go, or if you finished them and they're ones that you particularly loved or particularly hated and decided not to finish. I would love to hear from you. So yeah, I hope you're having a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye!